Hey everyone, Shane here with etrailer.com. Today I have a dual axle trailer. I'm going to walk through how to install the DeeMaxx 3,500 pound brake kit. Upgrading your brake setup from drum brakes to disc brakes, number one, most beneficial, it's going to greatly reduce your stopping distance with the load on the trailer. You're going to have hydraulic fluid that's pumped directly to the piston inside of the caliper. It's going to squeeze the brake pad on each side against your disc. Or on a hub or a drum, you're going to look like this, and it's electric, and it's going to send an electric signal in, pushing this magnet against the drum, and these pads are actually going to push out against that drum. Well, if you lose that electric signal, you lose your brakes. Again, disc brakes are going to send fluid directly to the piston on the rotor. So going from a drum brake to a disc, in my opinion, is going to be a huge upgrade. Very little maintenance with disc brakes. Only thing you're really going to have to really watch is your brake fluid, number one, and two, your pads. Replacing your pads when they need it is going to be your biggest thing. There's a couple different types of disc brakes out there. You have Kodiak, and you also have Dexter. The difference between DeeMaxx and the other two is DeeMaxx actually has a contract with the military, so they do a lot of brakes on their military vehicles. And on this, the caliper itself, DeeMaxx actually etches instructions on the front of it. So if you ever have to take this off, those instructions will tell you what you need to do to put them back on. All of our components are going to have a corrosion-resistant max coating. The groove in the top of in the middle of our disc here is going to be for heat reduction. So it's going to dissipate the heat so we don't have premature brake wear. Our hat here, you'll notice the holes, this is for water drainage, which makes this great for marine applications as well. It's going to help greatly reduce any corrosion. Brake pads are going to have a ceramic coating, so they're going to really last a long time. Studs are going to be 5 on 4.5, and they're going to be 1/2 inch in diameter. Kit's going to come with pretty much everything you need to get your brake assembly installed on one axle. Your rotors, your inner and outer bearings, your inner seal, the races are already going to be installed in the disc, your cap, your caliper, and your brake pads. As far as the installation process, very simple, straightforward. You can do it in your driveway. If you don't have the time or the space, you can always check out our dealer locator. If you do want to give it a try, you never have, because you thought it may be hard, I challenge you to follow along with me. I promise you, it's not a hard job, and I'm going to walk through how to do it. To start our installation, we need to remove this cap. We're going to take a hammer. We're not going to keep any of this stuff, so if it gets bent or anything like that, you don't have to worry about it. Tap it until you get a gap in there. And you can take a flathead screwdriver or whatever you have to put it off the rest of the way. We're going to wipe off this grease here as much as we can. Then we need to pop this clip off. This retainer clip, we're going to pop it off. We're going to clean it off, and we're going to hold on to it because we're going to be putting it back on once we put our new brake assembly on. We'll wipe off this old grease. I'll set that aside. And we're going to take this nut off. This nut, you should be able to turn it with your hands. We're going to clean it off. We're going to be putting it back on. And there's a flat washer right there. You can pull it out like this if you want, or you can take your whole hub and slide it out. and pull it out with the bearings. We're going to clean it off. We're going to be saving it because we're going to be reinstalling that as well. We're going to pull our whole hub off. The outer bearing here is going to fall out, so make sure you have a rag if you don't want grease all over your floor. Pull it out like that. I'll just set this off because we're not going to be needing it. Our spindle, we're going to wipe all that old grease off of it. When you pull this off, you want to check your spindle for any wear, black marks, any grooves in it. Make sure that your bearings, your new bearings that you're going to be putting in, are not going to get damaged because the spindle's damaged. What's holding our brake assembly on is you have a stud here, 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 and here. On the back side here, or on the inside, you're going to have a nut. Ours happens to be an 11/16. So we need to remove the nut off of each one of those, and then we can pull our brake assembly off and remove our wiring. Once you get them all off, you can go ahead and discard them, the nuts, or you can hold on to them if you want. We're not going to be reusing those. We're going to have new ones we're going to be putting on. Slide our brake assembly off. You're going to have two wires connected to it because these are electric brakes and we're switching over to hydraulic. We're just going to cut those two wires. You're going to make sure you're cutting them off the brake side and not any wire that runs back to any of your lights or anything like that that might be in that loom. So before we start installing our new assembly, what we need to do is, since this has a Zerk fitting, we're going to squirt some new grease in there and it's going to clean out the inside of the spindle. It's going to come out this little hole. We may not be able to tell the difference because we're using the same type of grease, and this grease that's in here looks pretty new. So we may not be able to tell the old from the new coming out of it. Normally, the old grease will be like a dark color. It looks like that's pretty good. We'll wipe off the excess that we just pushed out. And then we'll start prepping our disc, our rotor with our new bearings, and prepping our spindle to get our new assembly put on. Now we're going to take our disc. On the inside, we're going to take some grease. We're going to spread it around the race on the back side, and then when we flip it over after we get our bearing and seal put on this back side, we'll put some on the front side as well. Take a glob of it, put it in your hand like this, unless you have a bearing packer. And we're going to pack the bearings. You want to make sure that you don't drop these bearings on the floor. If you do, the bearing's damaged and you'll have to replace it. You see the opening on the front and the back. What we're going to do is you're going to take it like this. You're going to push that grease into that opening. And what we're looking for, we're really looking for it to come out through the little slots next to the bearings or next to the rollers. Since we have Easy Lube axles, we don't have to get it exactly perfect to where it's really stuffed because we're going to pump grease in there after the whole assembly is put on, and that will fill it. But we want to work some in there as much as we can. Once you get it packed, we're going to take it and we're going to drop it inside like that, and then we can put our seal on the back side. When we put our seal on, we want to make sure that it's going in flush. And And we only want it to meet the top edge of this. We don't want to sink it down in there. So if you don't have a seal driver, you can take a piece of wood. 2x4 works really good. And we're just going to tap it straight in the center. Make sure it's going in straight. Flip it over. And again, we're going to put a little bit of grease on that race there. Next, we're going to take our rear bracket, or our support bracket, and it's going to say rotor side, so you want to face that towards the rotor. We're going to slide it in, line up with the holes on the plate on the axle. You're going to slide your bolt in, and then put a nut on the back. We're going to do that with the 4 holes that are going through our back plate. And we'll come back with a 5/8 socket and wrench, and we'll tighten all 4 of them down. Then we're going to take our rotor and slide it on. We're going to pack our outer bearing, and we're going to slide it right inside there. We'll pack this just the way we did our back one, or inside the bearing. We're going to take a bearing, slide it in place. You can see how it's kind of angled. We want the smaller side going in. We're going to take our washer that we cleaned up earlier, slide it all the way up against the bearing. Take our axle nut, put it on. We're going to come back with an 1.5 inch socket. We're going to put on our axle nut, and as we're tightening this down, we're going to spin the rotor. What we want is we want to torque this to about 50 pounds. Then what we're going to do is we're going to back that off. So when we torque it to 50 pounds, what it's doing is making sure that that back seal is sitting all the way back as far as it can go, and you got a proper seal on it. Loosen that up. We'll come back and just finger tighten that. Once you get that finger tightened, come back with your clamp here, or your snap ring. Sometimes these things can be a little bit of a pain because of the threads on the spindle. And make sure that that snap ring is flat up against that nut. This keeps that nut from backing off. Now we're going to take some more grease, and we're going to pump grease into it. It's going to come out through the spindle. It's going to fill the inside of our rotor and our bearings, and you'll start to see it come out around this edge. I like to, as I'm pumping it in there, I give about 4 or 5 pumps in there, spin this, and make sure you're pushing it around the spindle and getting it good inside the bearings. Next, we'll take our cap and put it over the end. You want to make sure these go on straight as well. I like using a soft blow hammer. Make sure it's seated all the way against your rotor there. And we're going to take our brake caliper, and these pins here, these bolts are pushed through. We need to push them out to where they're flush. I want you to pay attention to the back side of this. I don't know if you can see it very well, but it has torque specs for these guys and for your bleeders. You're going to take your caliper. These bolts and sleeves are going to be pushed through. We need to push them out. Make sure you hold this rubber end right here. Push them out to where they're flush like that. If we turn this over, right on this back side, it's going to give you the torque specs for these two bolts, and it's going to tell you which bleeder screw to use depending on how you have the caliper set up. This flange here and this one here, we're going to set our caliper onto the bottom one, pads around the disc. So like that, we'll get it lined up with the threaded hole that's on the back side of this. And tightened in there enough for it to hold it in place. Take a 1/2-inch wrench. Go ahead and tighten these down. I like to kind of tighten them down at the same time, so a couple turns on one, a couple turns of the other. So we make sure we're not pulling our caliper more one way. Once you get your caliper in place, you got your bolts tightened in there by hand. Come back. You've got them tightened with the wrench. We're going to come back and we're going to torque them to the specifications that are on the caliper that I showed you a minute ago. That's pretty much it for getting your brake assemblies in place. You're just going to repeat that process for the other ones that you're doing. Next, we're going to move on to running our hydraulic lines and mounting our actuator. So the next part is going to be mounting your actuator. Really, depending on how your trailer is set up, it's going to depend on how you want it mounted. We originally were going to mount this back behind this box because this box was pulled forward. Our neighbor decided he didn't want it back there. He was going to end up moving the box back. So we made a plate out of some scrap metal to mount it up here in front. With the plate, drill a hole in the back for your hydraulic line. Another one in the front for your 4 wires. The 4 wires you have coming off it are blue, yellow, black, and white, which I'll show you how we're going to hook those up in just a little bit. Very simple. I got it bolted right to the frame, the plate, and I have nuts and bolts or screws on the actuator to mount it in place, so it's not going to go anywhere. So on the back side of our brake assembly, there's going to be a little red cap there. Rubber, pull that off, and we decided to go with the red line hydraulic line kit because it's got this 90-degree angle, and you can see how close we are to the frame. If we would have went with like a Hydrostar or Kodiak or Hydrostar, it would have come straight out, and I don't want, if there's that much flex in this and this goes up, I don't want it to hit the bottom of that. So with this 90-degree angle, we can turn this a little bit to keep it from hitting that when the trailer is loaded down and being used. Make sure that's threaded in there straight. You're not cross-threading it. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to put it about at an angle like that. So that when I run my line up like this, it gives enough flex on my line that if that moves, this isn't going to touch anywhere on our frame and get damaged. Once you get that in, come back with a line wrench. And I highly recommend using a line wrench, not just a regular wrench. We're going to use a 3/8. I'm going to try to tighten this in the direction that we want it to sit. And we don't want to over tighten these. Once you get one line in, you're satisfied with how it's sitting, go ahead and repeat the process for any other rotor or brake assemblies that you're putting lines on. Next, you're going to have 3 of these inside your kit. You're going to take 2 of them and you're going to put them together. On your driver's side front axle, we're going to thread that setup into your brake line that's going to your brake assembly. From here, what I suggest doing is taking your line that's going to come from this brake assembly to the back one, go ahead and get it routed, bent the way you're wanting it to be, get the one that's going to run across over to that side, and the one that's going to run up to the front to your actuator. Before we drill any holes in the frame or mount any brackets, what I suggest is lightly putting the stuff together. And you can just hand thread these in for now. It's going to go to my back one. This one. I'm going to run across to the other side. This one is going to come down into the top of this, and that's going to come from my actuator. The reason I want to hand thread these in, I'm not tightening anything down yet, so I know that how my lines are going to fit in here. I can mount that bracket there. That'll hold this line in place, these brackets, these three lines. Just kind of give yourself a layout. You know, we can kind of adjust the lines a little bit, but again, before we drill any holes into our frame rail, we want to make sure everything's going to line up the way we want it to. All of our brake lines going out to our assemblies, coming in, connecting to any of our fittings that we're going to be tied into. We're going to look at how it's right on the frame rail, where we're going to be mounting some loom clamps to hold our lines in place. Look at all of it before we drill any holes. So that one looks good. I got this one running back to this back assembly here. I can mount this one like this. Go over to our other side here. That one I can mount in there. That gives you an idea. I think would be good. We can go ahead and mount our brackets and get our lines tightened down into everything. We're going to take this bracket. Again, we're loosely installed. We can go ahead and pull our lines off, pull our fittings off. There's a groove in the top of that line. Take this bracket, slide over the top, and take this plate. We're going to slide it in place, and that's what's going to hold it. You may need some channel locks or some pliers to get this. Doing it with your fingers is going to be tough. Well, I'll tell you, you're going to have to work to get that bracket on there. Take this guy, thread it back in place, so we get it up there to mount our other two lines going into it. And I've marked my spot of how this is going to sit. So I'll go ahead, take a self-tapper, and we'll attach it to the frame rail. Once you get one bracket in place, you get any of the fittings you're putting on, your lines put into the fittings, everything's tightened in place, you can move on to the next bracket. Once you've bled your lines, you fixed any leaks you may have, you're ready to go. So we're going to do it for a look at installation of the DeeMaxx Disc Brake Kit, Redline Hydraulic Line Kit, and HydroStar Actuator.